Conscient Podcast, episode 184. NIA Center for the Arts Executive Director Alika Hall, Artificial Intelligence Art Expert Sean Caesar, and Technology Consultant Alex Hosova.
And my journey with AI started from a curiosity about how technology can extend to the boundaries of artistic expression. I was fascinated by the possibility of emerging traditional art forms with traditional artistry, you can go to the next slide, and to create something entirely new and engaging. My passion for innovation drove me to explore AI as a tool to enhance my creative visions and bring my artistic ideas to life in ways I could only dream or imagine.
This is a special episode of the Conscient Podcast featuring a panel that I recorded at the Gathering Divergence Multi-Arts Festival and Conference Spring 2024, presented by Cultural Pluralism in the Arts Movement of Ontario, or cpamo, in collaboration with the NIA Center for the Arts. The recording took place on June 6, 2024. The episode will begin with a talk by Alika Hall, Executive Director of the NIA Center for the Arts. It was not part of the panel, but it preceded the panel, and it made sense to have it be part of this episode because Alika spoke about the history of the building and the history of the Black arts community in Toronto. So it was a good way to have context and history. So after this presentation by Alika, you'll hear presentations by the two panelists, Sean Caesar and Alex Hosova. Unfortunately, the quality of the recording is not optimal because of the reverberation in the room. So I have included a transcription of their presentations in the transcript section of this episode. The panelists were quite insightful about artificial intelligence and the use of technology, which is not directly addressing issues of the ecological crisis, but are such a big part of our lives today that to address AI is to talk about our future. So, for example, Sean said this.
Get us all on board, all to the table to discuss about the implications of the diversity and representation and just inclusion in general, that we're at a crossroads where it could be very detrimental to us future forward.
And to complement that, Alex spoke about
we should all be taking it with a grain of salt until the technology in society gets to a point to say, what is real, what is realistic, how am I using this, and am I getting the answers that will help me make a good, positive decision.
And I'm going to play a little audio game here. I'm going to reread my introduction from the event so that it's clearer in terms of the sound quality. Here we go.
Good morning. I'm Alika, I'm the Executive Director at NIA Center for the Arts. And I thought, I'm talking about precarity, which is kind of a tough topic for 10 a.m. on a Thursday, but I thought I would infuse some genesis of, I think, this organization has had to go through a lot of precarity in its origin and its development. It's preceded by a lot of precarity. I think Black artistic production is just fraught in an environment that's fraught with precarity. So I still think there are some gems and resilience and learnings within our story and what brought us here today. So the building that you're in has a long history, but for us, we've been in this building for the past 10 years. And the idea of the center actually stems back to 2008. So the NIA Center was born out of the Youth Challenge Fund, which was a fund that was set up after the Summer of the Gun in 2006, which was a summer in which over 60 young Black men lost their lives in Toronto due to gun violence. And for probably the first time, the province, at the time, the provincial government, decided to make a major investment in particularly supporting Black youth and sort of naming the funding as being designated for them and being designated to Black youth in Toronto's inner suburbs, which is where a lot of the violence was happening. And so the fund was a partnership between United Way and the province, and sort of a group of community leaders were brought together to figure out how to distribute the funding. And so there was a number of rounds of investments in particularly youth-led initiatives, and there was quite a uproar in the sector at the time because youth-led wasn't really didn't have, I think, as strong roots as it does now in understanding. But towards the end of the existence of the fund, because it was meant to be temporary, they began to think about legacy projects. So projects that would live beyond the life of the fund and hopefully have a long-term existence in the city and be an ongoing resource. And one of the areas that was recognized as an important vehicle for young people was the arts. And that, so many young Black creatives were talented and creative and putting out work, but didn't really have an ongoing resource to support them in honing those skill sets and those talents. And so a group of artists were brought together, folks like Debbie Young, who's an amazing playwright, Amanda Paris, another playwright and writer, and you might know her from her work on CDC, Winnie Mangesha, who's now the artistic director at Soul Pepper, e184, a musician and writer himself, Dr. Mark Campbell, who's an archivist and hip-hop professor out in Scarborough, Dr. Phil Cooper, an academic who's now out west. Those folks really came together to ideate what would it look like to have a space dedicated to Black artistic production and have young people be sort of at the heart of that work and be an ongoing resource for them. And so they began to just write a proposal, and all the legacy initiatives had to kind of go through like a feasibility stage, particularly if they wanted to have capital involved. So there was a vision from the very beginning to create a space, recognizing that, in our inner suburbs, a lot of our arts infrastructure is concentrated downtown, and as the suburbs, have grown and developed, and there were aspirations of having these complete neighborhoods that never really got realized. There's not a lot of space that people can go to just connect with one another, and for young people in particular, being able to access after school programs and places where they can meet like-minded peers and creatives. So the vision was to create a space, create a Black Arts Center. And so they went through initial feasibility study, they kind of began to pilot programs, and then they got awarded at the time $3 million to realize this dream of creating a Black Arts Center. And so, that was back in 2008, and it took quite some time to find a space. One of the requirements was, which was pretty astute tip at the time from the fund, was to focus on a space that was publicly owned, because of, again, the precarity of landlords and us living in an upward real estate, which we now see the full brunt of that. And so this is a city-owned property. It took a long time to find a property that would be suitable for the center, and that was ideally located. So we found this space in 2014, and of course its proximity to Little Jamaica is really key in that this is a neighborhood where Caribbean immigrants and African immigrants have been coming for decades to get their foodstuffs, to get their haircut, to purchase records, to really build and connect a cultural community. And so there's a long history of both entrepreneurship and artistic production in this neighborhood, and so we felt really honored to be able to create roots, to put down roots in this neighborhood and extend that legacy that so many of our parents and our ancestors are part of creating here. And so got this building in 2014, and then went through a very long process, kind of smiling and crying at the same time, of going through design and figuring out how do we utilize this building. So this building's been around since the 1900s. It is been a theater in its past life. It's been a cinema. It's been a bowling alley, and most recently it was a public health center. So I remember when I told my stepdad that I was, working on a new project, and he's very like spatially oriented. He can just he's like Google Maps in his head, and so I was like, oh yeah, I'm working at 524 Oakwood, so you should just come down and see it. And he was like, 524 Oakwood, you work at a club? And I was like, I see what you're doing. I see where you're at. So it's also a Beach Club and my friend. So lots of rich history. It's so fun when people come by and they're like, oh, I used to get my hair cut across the street, or we had an event producer come by and said he got sex ed in this building because he went to Wanwood Academy. This was a health center. So there's just lots of nice connections that people have to the center just by virtue of it being around in the community for a very long time. So we moved in 2014. We started doing some programming here, but it was also like a very old and decrepit medical facility at that time, so it didn't really look like a space that you wanted to do Black arts programming in. So we did work with a number of artists who did large-scale murals in the building at the time, and started to use it for residencies. And knowing that we were going to demolish it, kind of just give people full and free reign to work in this space and use it as best as we could. And then went through this long design process, and so worked with a number of artists and got input on how could we make the facility as multi-use and multi-purpose as possible. And so that took a number of years in part because we moved from being in one floor to what you now maybe see later is 3 floors. So went through a number of design iterations that were challenging, but we finally were able to break ground in October 2020. And so I think that was a pretty significant for me example of precarity, in part because we were going through this exercise of building a space, of ideating around how people could use it, and how they would come together, what the rooms would do, and how that would be able to be supportive of artistic production at a time where we could not connect. So our, even construction announcement was fully distanced. We were on the sidewalk. We were, all had masks on, and so it was a really, jarring kind of questioning of whether this exercise really had value. Thinking about not knowing what was on the other side of the announcement and construction, and are we just going to spend all this time to build this space, and then what is the future of arts and people coming together? So it was definitely a need to kind of ignore what was in some ways happening in parts of the world in order to continue to push construction forward and work through all the challenges that we faced in terms of finding walls were decrepit, or floors were uneven, hampering our accessibility plans. But I think that as a society, as a community, we really had to grapple with how we're doing the work that we're doing and who we're doing it for. I feel like every sector has just been turned on its head in terms of thinking about what its purpose is and how it continues to operate in this environment that we're still working through. So it really feels like post that time, precarity has become kind of the norm, just in part because our world has changed so dramatically since the pandemic. And so we went through 3 years of construction, and then opened up in November of 2023, so just late last year. And it was incredible to see people in this space, to see folks who were involved in the very early days of the NIA Center, come back and witness the moment of us bringing our community together and opening up this building. And I think that really it really cemented a legacy of folks who've been dreaming about having this kind of space for a long time, that even predates that kind of artist conceptualization in 2008, because we did our opening. We also did an exhibition over at TIFF that kind of paid homage to other kinds of Black spaces that have been paving the way for what is NIA Center today. And I think we don't necessarily think about 93.5 flow as a Black space, but when I was young, I was listening to a Buffalo radio station in order to listen to R&B and hip hop and the music that I was interested in. Like, we take for granted now that you can flick on the radio, or you can have your Spotify membership and just access any kind of music that you want. But Toronto didn't have a Black radio station until 1993. So there was a number of failed attempts to get that off the ground. So there's a lot of different leadership and artists who tried to create different kinds of spaces, whether they were physical or on the waves of, I don't know how radio works exactly, but what is there, or in their backyards, in their front homes. We learned about folks who did community organizing around political education in their living room, in their home, and so a lot of members of our community have had to deal with the precarity of not being seen as either legitimate artists, not being supported through funding or access to space, not having that continuity in being able to continue to produce and make work because they haven't been adequately supported. And I think really what has resonated with me in terms of talking to even folks who are elders in the dance community, talking about coming to this country with their practice and approaching different funders and not being recognized because they hadn't been to a formal institution, a ballet school, and being told that Caribbean folk dance is not real dance, and that's just 20, 30 years ago. And so really that kind of environment, that systemic racism is what has produced a lot of precarity for Black artists and Black artistic traditions, and which is part of why this kind of space, I think, is important to both affirm artists in what they're doing, to affirm and say to a broader art sector and community that our traditions are valid, and not to mention valid, are actually pushing culture in so many ways. And yet still, in fundraising for this project, people would ask me, well, why are you building this? Why don't you just go and ask the AGO to include more, artists in their collection? Or why don't you, just assemble some artifacts and push for the ROM to include more artistic traditions? And it was this sense that, these large institutions not recognizing that they have had this long history and opportunity to do this work and haven't, and we need to actually cultivate our own talent, right, to create a space that is affirming, because we know that these institutions are still grappling with valuing our work in the way that it should, embracing our artistic traditions, and elevating our artists. And so I think, there's always that tension between, do we carve out our own thing, or do we, figure out how to change the institution? But this work takes time, and I think that it's really vital for us to be able to ensure another generation of artistic creatives are not lost. Speaking to some of our elder artists, it's just like some of them gave up. They weren't supported, and so they stopped producing. And so that kind of, institutional barriers, I think, is something that has been an enduring feature of that Black artistic producers have had to push up against in forging ahead. And it's been sort of a future and kind of precarity that has had to be addressed. And so I think the lesson from our community is really about the kind of care, the kind of organizing that we've done as groups without institutional or formal support. I think of Anique Jordan and her Black Women's Group, which is really, a WhatsApp group, but there's over 250 Black women artists in that group who have come together, who do exhibitions, who have done major events, and who just offer care and support, information about residencies, information about, artistic opportunities. Folks are able to put in questions that they have about, contracts that they're reviewing. All kinds of resources and references, just leveraging, a simple technology that we all have on our phone. And I think those are some of we think oftentimes, obviously because we're a large sector in terms of addressing precarity, there are obviously macro initiatives that we need to be pushing for and advocacy that needs to be done. But there is a lot of, I think, care and, smaller scale initiatives that we can do to help share resources and share understanding amongst us as actors in the sector. But I do want to acknowledge the challenging times that we're in. The volatility in our just economic environment. Post-pandemic, of course, we're in the midst of a pandemic. We're still grappling with audiences. Feeling comfortable, feeling energized to come out to events. that's just been a significant shift that we've seen, for us as an organization and others across the sector. And, the future of that is not clear, right? Folks are continually competing with thing on their hand as always being super entertaining, and now we have to talk about the value of connection, right? The value of not only the art, but the ability to see art live and in a room with other people and not just on a screen, right? So that's, I think, a level of precarity that we don't usually think about when we think of, I think, precarious times, but it's a constant sort of underpinning, I think, of our work is how do we continually make sure that we're offering quality experiences and reminding people of the value of connecting, which we were desperate for in 2020, and now we're kind of flippant about. So that's a level of precarity. I think, as well, the threat opportunity of AI, as both a contributor in the creative space and, the ease that it provides for certain kinds of tasks, but also the threat that it provides to other creatives and artistic producers. Of course, the shift to project-based funding and what I call the festivalization of funding, and that there's so much interest in sort of one-time big events that happen in the world as opposed to the work that happens day to day and localized in communities and offers support to people. There's a shift away from that and a shift, towards the big sponsor opportunity to have your, sponsor and brand and lights over the course of a 2-day festival. And while festivals are great, bring people into a community, create opportunities for artistic great artists, they also can't replace the kind of day-to-day opportunities that we have to connect, to be creative and to share in community with others. So I think all of those factors are kind of, it's not, we don't have a clear end date. It kind of feels like we're in this just state of precarity, and so there's a real need to acknowledge it for one. I feel like at times we, talk about it, but it's not really part of a consideration of our actual organizing work, and so I really encourage us to think about what this means and leveraging both the technology for one, for example, to help us while being able to be critical of it. And I think those ongoing kinds of conversations are needed at a mass level in order for folks to not arrive at a place where they're like, oh wait, we're not creating with this anymore. We're not investing in creators. We're just using AI. So I think some of the other practices that I've found to be promising is I think, yes, recognition of the issue and not just the symptom. I think too often we focus on precarity leads to scarcity, leads to competition, because we're not actually looking at the cause of the issue. And that to me is a conversation that constantly needs to be surfaced. When funders are like, oh, well, your numbers went down on this event. It's like, well, let's talk about audiences and development, and as well as how the trends of people's participation in artistic events generally before we start analyzing, year-over-year data on one particular event. So keeping that top of mind. Of course, being able to diversify funding resources is important, but I think that's going to take a lot more innovation in this new time, as well as being able to be more collaborative. Partnerships take time, getting to know people, working together takes time, and people kind of, I think, folks sometimes take that work for granted, but it might mean that, we need to spend more time getting to know each other so that we can, more quickly mobilize when we need to or work together. And having those strong networks of both organizations and creatives is going to be really key. I think we can't be just working in silos. It's a long, obviously, challenge for the sector, but I think now more than ever, there's that need to have a shared conversation and shared advocacy about the kinds of challenges that we're facing. And then I think that the last one I might say is around, the flexibility and adaptability. We've always been a smaller kind of organization, which I think does help us to be both responsive and develop new initiatives that are responsive to community quite quickly. And I think that's what makes institutions quite challenged by the kind of environment that we're in, and also being seen as being responsive because they are much slower to be able to mobilize, their larger organizations. And I think that ability to not be entrenched and be open to new ways of doing things is really key to us being able to respond to the kind of precarity and volatility that we're seeing around us. And then the last one is, around advocacy and awareness, which we all know is important. But I think doing that from a much more shared perspective and being willing to go out and take more dramatic ways to advocate is really important. I think we're too nice as Canadians and we need to be on the street more. But that's just me. And I think that the last point I would say is there's a lot of conversations I feel like I've been in the past few months around the value of art and talking about the value of art and the sector needing to do better at articulating what the value is of the arts sector and what our contributions are as artists and producers and culture producers. And I agree. I think that there is, we feel it, audiences feel it, but the ability to actually convey that magic to other folks falls short. It does fall short quite a bit, but I do feel like we're not actually leveraging all of our skill sets as storytellers. I'd love to see a campaign, a group of artists or artist organizations tasked with building a campaign to talk about the importance of the arts and its value. And it's taking, 9 months to ideate about what is specifically that magic and how do we translate that into a quick soundbite for people to be able to witness, experience, and persuade them. So I think that we need to put more awareness essentially into all of the work. We're so focused on the output, on the show, on the exhibition, on the work that we need to, I think, take a step back and actually get aligned on talking through our story and create a compelling case together and tasking those, group of people that we want to do that and investing in them to do so. I think we're just oftentimes so focused on the work, and I think that's part of what a precarious environment drives, right? When you feel unsure, when you feel unstable, when you're not sure where that project funding is coming for, that capital funding is coming for, we produce. And I think part of the resistance and strengthening of our network is actually saying no and taking a step back and resting on our laurels a bit, because they're long laurels and they have lots of projects behind us, and actually taking the time to reflect and strategize and articulate our value proposition to everyone. So that feeds into my whole spiel about rest and the importance of that, but I see Ken giving me time, so thank you so much for listening to my TED Talk. And if there's any questions, I'm happy to chat, but I also see you on the computer.
Thank you, Veronica. It goes perfectly into our next panel. I'll invite the panelists up as we go through this particular transition. So the panel will be speaking about the impact of technology on the practice of the arts, and then also includes conversation on AI and all the things that we know. So is working in AI in the arts innovative, emergent as a practice? Or does it jeopardize creativity? In what ways are new technologies, and in particular artificial intelligence, AI, impacting creation? I think there's many things in there, working digitally, for example, with hybrid. I think there's many things we decided what technology does and the impact of technology on the arts. Our moderator is Claude Schreier. And we also have Alex Josevano and Sean Caesar on the panel. And if you are online, their bios will be dropped into the chat. I'm sure they will also just tell a little bit about themselves as they do their introduction. Without further ado, the first panel.
Hi everyone, bonjour. Welcome to the Impact of Technology on the Practice of the Arts panel. As part of the Cultural Pluralism in the Arts Movement of Ontario and their Gathering Divergence Multi-Arts Festival and Conference Spring 2024. Now that's a mouthful, but this is where we are. So a warm welcome to our audience here at the NIA Centre for the Arts in Toronto, and also those joining us online from across Canada and listening offline on Conscient Podcast, episode 184. My name is Claude Schreier, and I'm a composer by training, and I'm now retired, but I worked for 21 years at the Canada Council for the Arts, where I ran the InterArts office and was also an advisor in arts granting. And I wanted to tell a quick story about 2008, when the NIA Centre for the Arts was created. I remember they came to us at the council and said, where do we fit? Where does a multi-purpose, multidisciplinary arts organization fit in the more vertical, disciplinary-based structure of the Canada Council and other funders, for that matter? And InterArts was one of the places where they went, as well as the Equity Office and a few other places. But it was a struggle to find a place for an organization with the broad mandate. So that's the story of my relationship of the early days of NIA Arts Centre. And today we're going to talk about artificial intelligence, and it's a tricky topic because we think that we know something about it, but it keeps changing literally every day. So let's jump right in. I'm going to do that again. Let's skip that part about artificial intelligence. Now, I'm now retired from the public service. I'm now retired from the public service and have become an art and climate activist. For example, I was a founding member of the Sectoral Climate Arts Leadership for the Emergency, or SCALE, which I invite everyone to join. And I also produced the podcast called Conscient, about art and the ecological crisis, ainsi que sa version française, le balado conscient. And one of the reasons that I recorded this panel for my podcast is that there is a direct connection between our use of technology and our relationship to the ecological crisis. So I really appreciate the opportunity to go deeper into these questions for my own learning and for everyone's education. And this isn't my first cpamo panel. In 2021, I chaired a panel In 2021, I chaired a panel on the climate emergency. And this is not my first cpamo panel. In 2021, I chaired a panel around epoch arts in planetary renewal, and you can listen to those episodes on Conscient episodes 92, 93, and 95. Today, or this year, the theme is epoch artistic transformation, navigating beyond precarity towards stability. And today's topic is, how does technology fit into that precarity and stability? So some of the questions we are considering is, how does working with artificial intelligence in the arts lead to innovation, emergent practices, and artistic transformation? Or does AI jeopardize creativity and lead to further precarity for artists? In what ways are these new technologies, and in particular AI, impacting the creation, dissemination, and preservation of art? What relationships do artists need to create about and with AI and digital technology? Who has access to the infrastructure, and how is it being programmed, and are all worldviews being included? Are there integrative ways in which artists and arts organizations can continue to use digital technologies? What are some of the barriers? In what ways are creative rights and revenue generation impacted by AI and generative technologies? How is AI being used to make decisions that shape the trajectory of our lives, including creative control of artistic production? And finally, What does all of this techno-fantasy matter anyway when our planet is on fire and we're facing imminent social collapse due to ecological overshoot, of our planet's boundaries? And that last question is the one that preoccupies me the most, but I realize is one. No, don't use that. And before we go any further, I want to admit that I'm actually not that excited about artificial intelligence. Even though I've used it in my artwork and my podcasts, I'm personally more interested in the contributions of traditional knowledge keepers from around the world who have always known how to live in harmony with the earth and with all living beings. I question how artificial intelligence is going to help us survive. It might, if it has the right intelligence to feed it. And I gave an example, and I want to give an example of a presentation I heard recently by Leslie Vanessa Lee Raymond of Concordia University about the Abundant Intelligences research program, which explores how indigenous knowledge and systems can expand and transform AI. So this is a research project that published a position paper called Indigenous Protocol and Artificial Intelligence, which to me is a good starting place for those who want to design and create, which is a starting place for those who want to design and create AI from an ethical position that centers indigenous concerns. The aim of abundant intelligences is to articulate a multiplicity of indigenous knowledge systems and technological practices that can and should be brought to bear on the question of AI. And in my research for this panel, I came upon a statement by UNESCO and MILA, which is the Quebec Artificial Intelligence Institute. And they said, "Our challenge is to develop AI systems that are human-centered, inclusive, ethical, sustainable, as well as upholding human rights and the rule of law." But generally that's not how capitalism works. But it certainly is something to aspire to and something that our panelists will address in just a few minutes. I want to give another example of a policy document that I recommend called Disruption on the Horizon. It's a report by Policy Horizons Canada that predicts a number of things, and in particular in relation to artificial intelligence. They say they project that people cannot tell what is true and what is not. The information ecosystem is flooded with Policy Horizons Canada, which predict the following disruption, or the following potential disruption by AI. I'll just read you a bit of it. People cannot tell what is true and what is not. The information ecosystem is flooded with human and artificial intelligence-generated content. Mis- and disinformation make it almost impossible to know what is fake or real. It's much harder to know what or who to trust. More powerful generative AI tools, declining trust in traditional knowledge sources, and algorithms designed for emotional engagement rather than factual reporting could increase distrust and social fragmentation. More people may live in separate realities shaped by their personalized media and information ecosystems. These realities could become hotbeds of disinformation, be characterized by incompatible and competing narratives, and form the basis of fault lines in society. I won't read the rest, but I think you get the idea that they're anticipating a world of where trust is shaken. And I guess my question today is, what is the role of art? What are artists doing in and around these challenges and opportunities? So it's my great pleasure this morning to facilitate this panel and to introduce our two panelists, Sean Caesar and Alex Hocevar. And I'll also be inviting questions from the audience in person or online. Let's start with Sean Caesar, aka Tongues Twisted, who is producer of the Maybe Might Matter exhibition. And I recommend you check out the website of this exhibition. It's wonderful. He's also the owner of Frame 5 Media and Second Shooter Sean. He'll be showcasing his work again. His work showcases the rapid advancement of artificial intelligence. His work showcases the rapid advancement of artificial intelligence generated images. Sean's work also guides viewers through the progression of AI's capabilities, sparking conversations about the creative explorations, possibilities, and implications for the future of art along the way.
Thank you very much. Thank you both. And thank you, the Irish Center for Arts. This is a beautiful, beautiful space that you guys have established here. And I had no idea that it had been around for so long and in such a central location. Incredible. I'm here today to discuss my exploration through AI and the arts. So I'm going to actually just bring this straight through right now and get you started. You're going to see me doing a bit of audibles, throwing my thumb up to advanced slides because that's what we're doing today. So go ahead. Without further ado. Spun up over here. So I did an exhibit actually called Maybe Might Matter, which is the exploration of the merging of artistry and technology. Artistry and technology. And it was actually encouraged after many of my artist friends started to decry AI back in this corner where it was, they said stealing from their art, and I jumped into this exploration or this project actually to show that like a bit of the damage has been done already, and if we don't get us all on board, all to the table to discuss about the implications of the diversity and representation and equitable, just inclusion in general, that we're at a crossroads where it could be very detrimental to us future forward. So what you're going to see through my presentation is a lot of pretty stuff and all of the cute stuff that I can do, and I'm going to show you the power of how you can augment your artistic ability with AI. And then we start to speak about some of the benefits and the detriments of it, and kind of the path forward from here, and we put together everybody to the table. So now, without further ado, I bring to you. Okay, so hello everyone. So allow me to introduce myself. My name is Sean, or Sir Sean, as my mother named me. And my journey with AI started from a curiosity about how technology can extend to the boundaries of artistic expression. I was fascinated by the possibility of emerging traditional art forms with traditional artistry. You can go to the next slide. And to create something entirely new and engaging. My passion for innovation drove me to explore AI as a tool to enhance my creative visions and bring my artistic ideas to life in ways I could only dream or imagine. So we can jump to the next slide. And so professionally, I am a photographer, I'm a videographer, a graphic designer, web designer, editor, and an AI, art aficionado. That's where I am now. Being creative has been a blast. It's afforded me the opportunity to learn, travel, explore, and experience from a wide range of lifestyles and add that to my knowledge base of the world around me, which has also fueled my creative ambitions further. I'm an award-winning photographer, videographer, graphic designer, web designer, editor, and lately, a bit of an AI guy. Speaking of AI, I had no idea at the time that it maybe might matter, and I mean like the acronym didn't even exist yet. So today, I'm going to give you a brief overview as to what AI is in art as of late, my personal journey and creative exploration in AI, the importance of diversity and representation in it, presently and forward thinking, accessibility, benefits and detriments, and future forward how you can be involved. Are we ready to jump into it?
Let's do it.
All right, let's do it. So we're going to talk about like the actual, what I actually do right now with my day-to-day actually is I work a lot with large language models and with text-to-image models, with some of the stuff that my clients need to have done. And that can be creating images with Black people in it. Let's just keep it there first and foremost, because as an artist, when I try to find images on stock repositories of people that look like me, I wasn't finding them at all. And then when I was finding them, I promise you, it was one brother that they flew down to LA and they had him shoot every single campaign. He's a doctor, a lawyer, a dentist, everybody, and then that was it. So AI had that was what actually had me dig my heels in and be like, this can be of huge benefit. So I'm trying to show here in this slide that this is how images are actually created through AI, because when a lot of artists say that, oh, well, it's just stealing, I feel like they just put their head in the sand and they're closing their mind to like what the possibilities are. So these text-to-image models are straight from large language models, like everything that has been trawled from the internet over the past, say, 30, 40, 50 years. And it has learned and it's able to distill this information down into what it is that you're asking for. So you'll put in a prompt. There's large language model vectors here, if you can follow my chart here, that brings you to a diffusion, which is like a pixel cloud, which is like a bunch of like little dots. It looks like the twin screens on like a, when you're on bad TV or whatever, the noise on TV, and then it will take your prompt and it will start to subtract from that noise until it actually repeats that and gets your final result, which we have down there in the bottom corner. Now, I'm not going to bore you to death with all the process of it right now. I'll bring you through to my actual story. So now that we've got the explanation out of the way, I hope I haven't lost any of you guys yet. My story starts as a young creative Black entrepreneur. And I mean, I didn't know it just yet. The start of it was all not that easy. While I've celebrated significant milestones like successful exhibitions and partnerships, I've also faced challenges related to access to capital and to opportunities. So fast forward to 2019, I found myself going through significant life changes. I found myself at a job, and you can see me there, doing technical support, just disconnected from my creativity. As I think you were calling it too critical to my name, Sean, how can I help you today? And that's all I did, tech support all day long. I felt like just checking in and checking out in my head into creating, and so I created the maybes. So these are the maybes. Through this battle with like just apathy and processing life, I created this series of maybes as a way to offload the woes of the day. I would fill literally a page of these faces every day, just representing a range of moods and faces, and sometimes the customers on the other end of the line that I was hearing and figured out that they maybe might matter one day. Oh, and then like that right there is the actual sketchbook from my job sitting at work. So right around the end of that year, this was my first exploration into creating with AI, where you have to say like feeding my images into AI, as in this instance, as you can see here in the journey, and see what it provided me with. I'm from the days of like onion skinning paper, you know what I mean? Like for instance, if we wanted to draw a logo of a planet and have stars around this one, but like maybe chocolate chip cookies around the other, you would draw one, and then on the onion skin paper, you would create the carbon copies and make amendments, and so on and so forth. Now AI is affording me the opportunity to make many copies of like planets, or in this instance faces, in the blink of an eye, as opposed to the pages of maybe that I like scrawled down and got burned on my wrist and carpal tunnel syndrome before. So I thought like, might this be a way of exploring more ideas faster? And so the following was an exercise into the next chapter of my AI adventures, and brings me to my second AI art like use case. So it's poetry. So I go by the name Thomas Twisted, and it was like back in the day I was going to be getting into doing the rapping thing. So poetry as an outlet, a lifelong hobby, has followed me, and I enjoy the challenge of catching cadence and wordplay and twisting linguistics. Most often my writings are in response to what I'm experiencing. Before mastering the world of prompt writing, the prompts that I showed you before, I was curious to see how the technology would just interpret my words, so like my bars that I put in. So this image that you're seeing here was created off of the bars that I wrote there that said, despite the winds and woes of all the world's calamities, we found a space and time to bridge a gap within our galaxy. Genuine, no fallacy, the yin and yang mentality, challenging to balance me, the ebb and flow duality. And then it gave me that, and like, that's bars, right? So people are using AI generative art to work through things in their lives. It can be a way for like a very like cathartic form of expression, just getting some ideas off. It can be a way to organize thoughts. Art allows people to communicate with images instead of words. This was also a series that I created off of AI, and this was with what I saw as a growing mistrust of technology and the unknown, coupled with the rising societal greed. I made this series called Opulence, and it depicts a series of contemporary Atlas mythological figures created by AI. The sapphires, the pearls, and everything else that I wanted to see on these figures, I described it to AI, and it created them for me. And then I wrote bars to go with it that say, I'm barely a technologist, but you see all the draw it gets. Now I'm free to buy the things I never could just shop to get. Vanity and opulence that translates across continents, captured by technology or caught up on my consciousness. I kind of see it opposite, not saying to stop dropping shit, but we already use the tech that try to block us not to get. And then I fed these into AI, and I gave it the descriptions of what I created of these people, and it made names for them, and it gave them backstories. I'm not going to give you all of that, but there's Gildarius, Onyxius, Obsidianos, Nixia, Aurelius, and Ormus, and like it gave me whole backstories for the original stories. But like once again, I was like, this is like really, really intriguing, right?
I'm barely a technologist, but you see all the drop gets. Now I'm free to buy the things I never could just shop to get.
So that kind of caught you off guard. That was one of the AI voices that I had actually created off of the work that you just heard. And she goes through it and just, it's way too slow and like, breathy. But that's been one of my explorations into it, is that using AI, for instance, for narration. And then like, which actually brings me to my next point, narration. And like, we talked about the fact that I cannot see myself in some of the stock images that I'm looking for out there. So then it brings us to the next part here, which is representation. So armed with this new knowledge and ready to start writing prompts, I like dove into AI with text image creation and was like, why am I not still seeing representation in arts that I'm creating? So let's look at it to the next slide there. Instead of showing you cases that you've all probably heard about by now, like the Jamaican that must have dreadlocks, and believe me, like if I ask AI for a Jamaican banana, that banana has dreadlocks, and it's just like Rastafari. The Indian Americans always happens to be surrounded by squalor, stuff like that. There are certain stereotypes that are already baked into AI. So in this instance here, AI was tasked with creating images that represented the following psychological diagnoses. And like, if you notice here, there a common theme among these images. This part of the discussion right here is about bias. Like, what are you noticing? Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And go ahead to the next slide. We can clearly see that like depression is for teenagers, right? And schizophrenia only impacts white men, and certainly general anxiety disorder is only an ailment of young white women, right? Like they're all categorically wrong. I don't see myself represented in any of these images that I generated. And I generated these images just saying that I want to see a person, and this is who the person is 9 times out of 10. This is not even in my slides here, but this goes even further into when I created an image. I wanted to have people coming out for sunflower photo shoots and for cherry blossom photo shoots. They only last a week each in either season, spring or fall, and getting people out was hard. So I created a whole series of models in sunflowers or cherry blossoms and in the types of outfits that I thought people would come out in. And if I just said that like it was a fit person or a regular person, or I didn't specify, then it was 9 times out of 10 it was a white woman. But if I said that the person was curvy, if I said that the person was fit, like 9 times out of 10 it was a black woman. And I just thought that was, I've even shared that part of my experience, just telling you guys out loud. And I thought that was intriguing. That further drove me into this to figure out, like, why aren't we represented accurately, right? In these, I don't see myself represented in these images. images, and I would do my kids. Let's be clear, I don't wish mental illness on anyone, but what this implies is that there are gender and race biases in medicine, and if we're not represented, then we're not considered. Our unique needs aren't factored in, or worse, our struggles will completely unnoticed. Beyond giving kids role models and normalizing a culture that's normalizing a culture that's not Eurocentric, what is clear to see is that representation is important. But before we go blaming AI, underrepresentation is not new. Technology companies have struggled against charges of bias and portrayals of dark skin from the early days of color photography in the 1950s, when companies like Kodak used white models in their color development. Canadian artist and researcher Dr. Joy Guillemini, founder of the algorithmic Justice League, came face to face with discrimination from a machine. Her MIT peers with lighter skin didn't have the same issues, so Joy tried drawing a face on the palm of her hand. The machine recognized it immediately. Still no luck with her real face, so she had to finish her project coding with her white mask over her face in order to be detected. Many questions surfaced, giving Joy the motivation and insights to start the algorithmic Justice League. You can find them online. I also noticed this, by the way, when I went to, just pause really quick because I'm going to talk about Gary Beale's actual project here. But when I actually went to go work on film set in Vancouver, I got typecast immediately, because I work on this side of the camera and I'm always telling people, go do this, go this, go that. So I was like, I want to go and get some experience. So I went to the film union in Vancouver and they were like, okay, you have a role as a digital artist. I waited, they didn't get called. So I was like, let me get some acting work. The very first 2 gigs, I got cast on the Good Doctor, and I was a crackhead in Good Doctor, and then on season 7 of The Arrow, and I'm a prisoner. And I thought that was this was immediately off cut. That was before AI even got into it. Anyways, so one of the biggest convictions came through jump into this exploration of what I can do with AI. Came through this project created for Gary Beale's The Melody Within, where we created 15 covers for his singles as well as his album layout, featured in there on the morning show and on Global News. I worked collaboratively with Gary to listen to the direction he wanted to take this project in artistically. I took into consideration the sonic catalog that he provided, and then we worked with certain colors that he wanted to in order to make it pop. Generating images of people in color and avoiding stereotypes took a focus and conscious effort in creating this project. We chose to stick within a certain color palette to keep the general artistic direction consistent between covers. This allowed us to blend a mixture of surrealism, illustration, and bright colors and ambiance to create a complete body of work that was unique from anything he created from until this point. I was able to use AI to bring performers into the actual artwork and to actually be able to show all of the different images. They provided references of Gary and KO and Jordan, for instance, and then I built the I Like That color. And that scene around them. You can see that in that scene there. The track that it would have been playing here is Gary Beale's Good People, Good Vibes. If you have a chance, take in Gary Beale's Good People, Good Vibes. Any of his music, it's incredible. Okay, we'll go to the next slide.
I'll put it in the episode.
Okay, yeah, that would be fantastic, thank you. Okay, so that's what I'm using. And so what you're seeing here is Afro introspection. This was a series created to draw focus to the fact that there's an underrepresentation of color, and even when oftentimes represented inaccurately, stereotypically, or inappropriately. I used a sharp contrast Art Deco style with a limited color palette for these pieces to draw emphasis to this statement while still showcasing the abstract beauty of melanin in media. The emphasis on the representation of underrepresented groups, including women, people of color, and marginalized communities, is evident. And this series was to challenge the stereotypes and broaden the narratives surrounding participation in art and technology. Here I'm using them as a creative engine with Midjourney to create out-of-the-box thinking for this dental aligner campaign for dental aligners. I would not be able to get giraffe or deer to sit for me long enough or wear chains in order to get what I need to get done here. But creating this for dental aligners allowed us to get something out of the box, some promotional characters that were anthropomorphic animals that were just way too happy with their smile. So as you can see here, we have the giraffe and we have the deer. And then with that orangutan, he works in HR for sure. And then we got the camel there. There's a range of characters and expressions that you can dive into in a matter of moments, and it's exciting and fun. With a strong commanded language and creative direction, we're able to whip up some distinct characters to help promote the company's vision of a brighter smile. So I think at this point, one of the things that I talk about, and this slide is actually relatively blank because I usually leave this part open for discussion, is to ask people, what do you feel are the detriments of AI and art that maybe might matter? Two of them that are obviously noted here are that, like, in a dystopian, far-flung society, like, artists don't create anymore. I am at heart of heart, I'm an artist, so like, if you just leave me with charcoal in a cave somewhere, I probably will still be getting busy on those walls like that. It's just in me. Like, even when I was working drive-thru at McDonald's, I was printing up receipts and I was like doodling on them, and I'd come home with all my receipts. I just told you about when I was working at QuickBooks and I was filling up pages, like the artist in you. So does AI threaten that? Will that light go out with artists? Then there's like safety issues and privacy concerns, and where is all of this information being scraped from, and where is all the data being collected, and why is it being collected without our information? And I try to tell people, unfortunately, a lot of this damage is already being done, and it's being done right now. And I don't want to get on a soapbox about it, but like my Android tried to update itself the other day, and I got particularly upset about this. This is not even on here, but like, because my previous update to 6.0 bricked my phone for a week, and if I can't contact my kids and I can't go over, then like that's problematic to me. But this 6.1 update that it wants to update, the newest update, and why it wants to do it is because it wants to put AI on my phone. I didn't ask for AI. I like AI in a sandbox that I can use it in, and I can close that sandbox or throw the whole sandbox on the beach if I want to. But the idea that it could be there, listening to your conversations in the background, which we already know it does to feed this advertising, and what the detriments to that in the future look like, I don't know. What does it mean like to art in the future? I don't know. So I asked in the future. No. Yeah. So I asked in the future, are artistic creations protected? Like even artistic creations that are made with AI, are they protected? Because there's still going to be authorship that should be bestowed upon the person that came around the genuine idea, because otherwise the idea never would have been manifested to begin with, right? We have copyright challenges over what has already been presented. So,
sorry, but ideas do not have copyright. Like, you cannot have intellectual property on an idea. That's not possible.
Okay, so that's a good argument, and great that you brought that up. So you cannot have intellectual property on an idea or a concept.
Yes, you cannot. You can have it on a work.
I'd now like to move to
on
Alex.
Not an idea.
Not an idea, but on a completed piece.
Yes.
Okay.
Or in process, but not on the concept.
Right. Okay. But then that would still bestow authorship to the person that initiated the concept, right? Like that is.
I'm not a lawyer.
No, okay. All right. Well, listen. This is why we're here to have this discussion, right?
Point's been made. We can come back, but
Absolutely.
please finish, because I think
Yes.
I know what you're saying.
Yes, okay. And then, so one of the last points I'll draw here before my closing slide is that it's safeguarding cultural heritage, and I think that this is one of the things that's important too as well. That's actually incorrect. Text was looking to the finishing slide, but AI allows us to preserve cultural heritage and to bring about stories from the past that we never would have been able to imagine or hear of otherwise. I just recently heard of a black man who was the very first, I believe, university graduate in Canada that was actually instrumental in propping up and saving Queen's University. And I had no idea about this story, and it's not told to me in school. It's not told to me in Black history. We don't have any illustrations. I can create illustrations now. I've used AI to help me create stuff for CBC documentaries as well. You know what I mean? To bring about history. Anyways, for win, lose, or draw, I don't know where you stand between it all. I'm not going to be the one to ref it, as you see in this image here. But that's my lens in on the AI and art emerging. That's my presentation.
I'd now like to move to Alex Hocevar. He runs the Hocevar Group, a consulting agency focusing on digital business transformations here in Toronto, and has been involved with many arts and cultural organizations, including the Canadian Opera Company and the Toronto Public Library.
And just like Sean, I too am a veteran of a Toronto area commons. So I'm very interested, or somewhere in the city there's two teenagers that are working away on the fry station or the drink station, and they'll be on a panel like this in about 15, 20 years. So it'll probably be 10 times as amazing as what we're talking about today. How's that? Better? I have probably about 25 years experience working in technology and business. Much of my career has been spent at the intersection of technology and the user experience. I was with Ontario Lottery Gaming for 15 years. I ended there as the head of strategy. I then made a leap to the opposite end of the altruistic spectrum and joined Toronto Public Library and was their CIO for a number of years. And now I'm out on my own, which is really exciting and allows me the opportunity to be in rooms like this with amazing people talking about amazing technology. And as Claude mentioned, my journey as a consultant has been primarily in the arts and culture space. So I've worked with organizations large and small across Canada, helping them understand how technology can be used and working with them to implement pragmatic, practical solutions. One of the things that happens with technologists is that they jump to the be-all and end-all solution, and at the end of the day, the person that's implementing the technology looks at this and says, what am I going to do with this? I'm paying a lot of money, it took forever to install, and it doesn't actually help us move forward. So I've lived that, and so when I work with my clients, we look for practical, realistic solutions that help move a business organization forward towards their goals. So within the arts and culture space, as I mentioned, I work with organizations large and small across Canada. One of the larger organizations that I work with here in Toronto, Canadian Opera Company, they brought me on 5 years ago to explore how are they using technology. And this was pre-COVID. I joke with the Canadian Opera Company that one of their unwritten mantras is, we've been doing the same thing the same way for 500 years. And that's just the reality of opera. That's how opera is. It's pure in its delivery. There is no amplification. There's very little technology on stage. What you're hearing is pretty much art in its purest form. And so for an organization that has been doing the same thing the same way for 500 years, the question really becomes, how can they be using technology to better their operations? And so I started working with them to explore how they use it today, what are some of the opportunities, what are the challenges, and to build a plan to help move the organization forward. Partway through that process, something called COVID came along. And it was fascinating to see that some of the potential solutions that we talked about that might have been very low priority prior to COVID suddenly became absolute urgent, business critical within days or weeks after that March 2020 date when we all stayed at home for many months and years. So it's incredible to see how quickly technology can begin to impact an organization. So whereas something like an opera company or some of the other arts organizations may have not been very big into streaming before, well, when you can't assemble thousands of people in your auditorium or even hundreds or tens, suddenly the ability to maintain that relationship through something like streaming and the internet, it becomes absolutely critical. Even more simple, something like laptops. Many organizations didn't invest in laptops. Suddenly, when everybody had to work from home, everybody wanted a laptop. And we can all probably remember it was almost impossible to find a laptop anywhere in Ontario for the first few weeks and months after COVID. So, working with organizations like Canadian Opera Company, National Ballet of Canada, etc., there's the element of how is the business running? Are we using the right pieces of technology? Are we finding the right partners, etc.? But then there's an element of within our ecosystem, are we working towards making sure that the artists they work with have the knowledge, have the understanding, have the access to new pieces of technology like Sean was talking about here. And the reality is it's incredibly challenging for many artists to get their hands on a lot of this technology. It's not something you can go to Best Buy. It's not even something you may be able to go onto the internet to get for free. If you're talking about hardware, forget it, because artists often don't have $1,000 to drop on a VR headset to even experiment with something like that, let alone more advanced levels of technology when we start talking about things like motion capture, photogrammetry, projection mapping, even 3D printing. You can go to your library, but it takes a lot of time to get to a level of proficiency where you can start to actually use that technology to its fullest. And so, as we were going along this journey, we started identifying some of these challenges. And one of the opportunities with larger organizations like COC or National Ballet, et cetera, is that they are centerpieces in the artistic community. They've been around for a long time, they have a lot of connections. And so one of the things we did was that we established programs that began to reach out to the artistic community to help elevate the discussion, engage artists, and to hopefully, at the very least, give them some level of understanding as to how this technology works, hopefully even further, in some cases this was very successful, to enable them with this technology to begin to express themselves through the technology. And with that, we created something called the Performing Arts Digital Lab, or PADL, P-A-D-L, as we were trying to find a good Canadian acronym. So we thought about PADL, completely spelled wrong, but it sounds really good. And within PADL, we did two things. We created something called the PADL Academy, which is a partnership that we established with Sheridan College to create. It was originally called a micro-credential, and then the province came out with rules around what a micro-credential actually is. We didn't call it a micro-credential. It's a learning opportunity where we invited artists from across the GTA to participate in a 4-session education session at the Sheridan campus down on the waterfront to get not only lecture-style learning about technology, but also actual hands-on experience. So those 4 initial sessions included things like VR. How do I use a VR headset? How do I create in VR? It included things like projection mapping. So if we wanted to turn this room into, many of you might have seen the Van Gogh exhibits that were around the city and similar things like that. That's all projection mapping, large-scale projection mapping. How do you do that kind of thing in a room like this? And we also explore things like game engines. So anytime you're looking at any kind of experiential art, you're in something like Unity. So we're all probably familiar with Fortnite, whether we play it or kids play it, etc. I'm terrible at it, but that game was actually created in Unreal Engine. Unreal is one of the largest graphic processing companies in the US, and that technology is also used not only on games, but that game engine is used to create virtual environments, which when you start talking about digital experiences, digital presentations in VR, in a room like this, even on TV, you need the engine. And so those are the kinds of things that we started to educate artists on. We had about 30 artists go through this process, and the feedback was, this is incredible, how can I do more? And so from that, we created a secondary session called Expanding the Canvas, which was an opportunity for artists that went through the program to propose how would they use that technology that they learned about, and then they would be funded to create a 5 to 10 minute piece using that technology. And so that was a really exciting project that allowed some of these artists that at the beginning of the day had no access to the technology. They suddenly not only learned about the technology, but now we're given them an opportunity to create using them. And so, as I mentioned before, artists went through that first phase of expanding the canvas to varying degrees. There was different levels of sophistication with technology, and that obviously led to the sophistication of the outcome. The most successful person that went through that took their 5 to 10 minute piece, got commissioned by the Finnish Opera to create what they did in our lab. It was presented in Helsinki, it was presented at Opera Beyond, and now they're actually shopping it around the world. And so, huge opportunity within the artistic community if people are given the chance. And that's what the PADL Academy and Expanding the Canvas is really focused on doing, giving people access and opportunity with these kinds of technology. Within the academy, those first 4 sessions ultimately evolved to something we call our 100 level courses. If you think back to college and university, that those first few courses were relatively simple, then you get into second. We've since created a series of 200 level courses, which build upon 100 level courses, but begin to explore more sophisticated kinds of technology. So more advanced Unreal Engine, generative AI, and we'll talk about that in just a second. Digital humans, photogrammetry, a lot of the technology that Sean talked about earlier, we're starting to educate the next Sean's to how can they use that technology to inform their artistic expression. And we've actually just completed a second round of expanding the campus where we selected 2 people that had gone through the 200 level courses and gave them funding to create a 10-minute piece. And so that's kind of in its final stages. Hopefully in the next few weeks or months, we'll be able to share with the sector just that. So that program is something I've been working with within the artistic community, specifically the Canadian Opera Company, for the last 2 years. As I mentioned a lot on Monday, unfortunately, or first off, it was funded primarily by Canada Council. Unfortunately, some of the strategic changes for Canada Council, that funding was evaporated. So although that program was incredibly successful, we have no funding to do the 3rd round, the 4th round, et cetera. So right now we're strategizing as to how do we keep this afloat. It went so well, we can't just let it die. And so right now we're looking for additional opportunities to gain funding, and considering the relatively low costs and the number of people we can send through and the successes we've had, we think there's a compelling story there to continue. That's kind of on the creative side. Specifically to today's conversation, I've had a lot of experience with working with organizations, implementing and exploring artificial intelligence solutions. And the way that I see artificial intelligence is really on a spectrum. On one end of the spectrum, you have the fairly low, we'll call them low risk, some ethical consideration, minimal moral consideration, minimal legal consideration in how can you use this technology to affect and improve your work, your business, your life, etc. These include things like basic use of something like ChatGPT. If I type something into ChatGPT and I get feedback, it's probably not going to tell me to go metaphorically jump off. It's going to give me some information. I need to disseminate if this is worthwhile, if it's valuable, etc. As we start to move along that spectrum, on the other end of the spectrum, I'll start to put things like artistic creation, copyright questions, ethical considerations, legal considerations. We may have all been familiar with the recent Scarlett Johansson issue with her voice suddenly became the voice of one of the AI tools, and she was actually asked, "Can we use your voice?" She said no, and suddenly it's her voice. As you start to move across that spectrum from basic office productivity to the other end, where you are actually mimicking humans, you may be taking human ideas and representing them, you may be creating art, etc. The risks associated to legal, ethical, moral, etc., increase exponentially. And so as we start to increase our use of AI, we really need to start considering that. And that was actually the genesis of the writer's strike in Hollywood last year, when the writers were saying, okay, studios, you need to promise that you're not going to use AI to replace us. Personally, I don't think that's anywhere near in the near future. You still need artists like Sean, like others out there to disseminate, understand, to instruct, etc. But at some point in the near future, the capability may get to the point where I may be able to say, write me a symphony. And I listen to it, I say tweak a few things here and there, and suddenly it's a pretty good symphony that I would not be able to create on my own. I would not be able to conduct on my own. I have some instrumental knowledge, but I would not be able to actually play it. But suddenly, have I created it? Or has the tool gone out and, based on everything it's learned and gathered up, represented other people's works? That's a question none of us have the answer to today, and the AI companies don't really have attribution on their claim. So the fact that this tool has created something, well, where did it learn it from? Where did it get that 10 note compilation that sounds amazing? Could that be some artist in southern US somewhere that made that, put it on the internet, nobody listened to it on YouTube, but the engine took it and represented it as mine? The legal, the ethical, the moral questions that come from that still exist, and they're going to exist in the near future. And as we heard earlier, capitalism is going to plow right through that without even considering what that means for society. And so a lot of those questions may not be answered quickly, may not be answered to the level of satisfaction that we may be hoping for, but it's coming. And we know it's already happening. Scarlett Johansson example. It's a good one. At the same time, when it comes to workforce and what people do, and the writer's strike example, well, on one hand, we can say, okay, this is all horrible that this is happening. The reality is that technology has been changing how people work forever. 30, 40 years ago, the #1 job in the United States, in every state, was typesetting. So if you needed a document written, there wasn't a Microsoft Word, there wasn't PowerPoint, you would have to go to the typing tool, give them a handwritten thing, and somebody there would type away and create you the very nice document. That job obviously doesn't exist anymore. Jobs like a switchboard operator, when you used to phone a company, you talk to somebody at the front, they would connect you to Jane Smith in accounting. That job doesn't exist anymore. And we all think, well, this is horrible. 10 years ago, there were hundreds of locations and thousands of jobs in the city with people working at video stores. Now we all go home, fire up Netflix, Amazon, etc., and we don't think any further about the guy whose job it was to rewind the VCR tape. That job doesn't exist anymore. And so, as we start to think about the efficiencies that AI brings, what are those jobs that aren't going to exist anymore? Not 20 years, not 30 years, but 5 years from now. Research assistant, interns, musicians, I don't know. I mean, these are the kinds of things. Technology and society move along, but the questions begin to emerge as to where are we ending up. And so again, the legal, the ethical, the moral questions for game-changing technologies like AI are out there. And I think it's up to groups like this to begin to ask the question as to where are we headed? What kind of guardrails do we want to have in place to help guide us to a positive outcome? The last example I'll leave you with was just the other day. I was listening to driving, I was listening to the radio in my car, and they started talking about an H5N2 outbreak in the US. So not getting into the epidemiological details, but H5N1 is this thing that out there should be a little bit worried about, etc. Then H5N2 suddenly came up, and I thought, oh, okay, that's different. So I did two things. I went to the internet and typed into Google, what's the difference between H5N1 and H5N2? And I was presented with a litany of articles from Johns Hopkins, WebMD, reputable sources, all over. And it was up to me to disseminate and to identify sources that I would find credible. Once I did that, I went to ChatGPT and typed in, what's the difference between H5N1 and H5N2? And within 2 seconds, it gave me about 4 paragraphs. Seemed reasonable. I have no idea where it sourced that information. And so, whereas as challenging as the internet is with fake news, etc., at least I see the source. With AI, it's not presenting me the source. It's just telling me something. And so I use my brain to say, oh, wait a minute, do I take this with a grain of salt, or does this actually make sense? And so we may be headed to a point in society where, in the absence of knowing what the actual source is AI telling me something accurate? And so I'll leave you with that although tools like ChatGPT, et cetera, are amazing, cool, they seem really good, we should all be taking it with a grain of salt until the technology in society gets to a point to say, what is real, what is realistic, how am I using this, and am I getting the answers that will help me make a good, positive decision. So that's it.